Got it.
This is technically a special meeting, so I will get started. Thank you, Mayor Story. Welcome to the meeting, everyone. I'm glad you could attend. In accordance with California Senate Bill 361, this meeting is not physically open to the public. Council and staff are meeting via Zoom, and there are several ways for the public to watch and participate. Information on how to join the Zoom meeting using the application or a phone is available on the published meeting agenda and also on our social media accounts. Our website is not working. However, you can stream the meeting on YouTube and by joining the Zoom meeting, and as always, watching on Charter Communications Cable TV Channel 8. The meeting is being recorded to be rebroadcast on the following Wednesday at 8 a.m. and on Saturday following the first rebroadcast at 1 p.m. on Charter Channel 71 and Comcast Channel 25. We have a new technician this evening. His name is Cedric. Thank you for being here, Cedric, and thank you, Mayor Story.
Okay, thank you, Chloe, and I also want to extend my thanks to Cedric for joining us and being our technician this evening. So next we have the Pledge of Allegiance, and I think I will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance at this time. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do we have any additions or deletions to the agenda?
Staff has no changes to the agenda this evening.
Are there any additional materials?
Mayor Story, none were received.
The next part of the agenda is oral communications, which is the opportunity for members of the public to address the council on matters that are not on tonight's agenda or for items that are on the consent agenda. If you would like to speak, just raise your hand in Zoom and you'll be given 3 minutes to speak. You can also dial *9 on your phone, or you can send an email to publiccomment@ci.capitola.ca.us. Is there anyone that would like to address the council at this time?
Mayor Story, I do not see any attendees with their hands raised, and we have not received any. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Actually, we do have someone raising their hand. We have Rory McBroom.
Good. Okay. Go ahead, Mr. McBroom.
Unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Hi, good evening, council members. My name is Rory. I wanted to address, I'm a local father, community member, and cyclist. I love riding my bike around town. The bike paths are amazing. In fact, my favorite thing to do is actually biking my kids on one of these fancy cargo bikes. So I've got my 5 and 6-year-old in the back, which adds about another 150 pounds. I feel comfortable and stable, but there are some places around town that I'd like to ask for you guys to consider adding to the public works budget, to consider repair and kind of primarily in one area. And that would be on the westbound on Park Avenue, westbound heading from SoCal into Capitola. And I find that my most, treacherous part is as I come underneath that overpass, there's a city sewer or city drain that takes up the entire bike lane. And it's not only myself, but it's my peers that I find kind of navigate this. I had a conversation at a campfire about the bike paths and also kind of stumbled upon this conversation that it's also a soft point and sore spot for a number of other cyclists. I see middle schoolers, elementary schoolers taking the same path and driving over it. And what ends up happening is that you can't stay in that bike lane. You have to veer you have to kind of merge into traffic to get around it. It's usually we're headed to school along with the other kids at the same time as people are headed to work, heads down, just kind of, a lot of times they can be absent-minded. And I feel like it poses as a threat, or at least a concern of mine and other community members. So if I may, I'd like to ask that you guys consider adding to the public works budget to consider repair along Park Avenue, and allocating money specifically for the bike lanes. Thanks for your consideration.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. McBroom, for bringing that to our attention. Just as a matter of clarification, so that we can maybe better understand exactly the area you're speaking of. You mentioned this is just coming from Soquel, just past the overpass, but is it before you get to Kennedy Drive?
Mayor Story, I may have removed his permission to talk.
Okay.
Oh, here he is. Okay, I'm sorry.
Did you hear my question, Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Sam. It's as you pass, if you're coming in the bike lane from SoCal, pass underneath the overpass, and it's at the set of lights of the exit ramp as people are leaving the freeway into town.
Good. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. And again, thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there anyone else that would like to speak in public comment?
Mayor Story, I do not see any other with their hands raised, and we have not received any emails.
Okay. With that, I'm going to move us on now to item number 5, which is staff and city council comments. Are there any staff comments?
Just a few. First, I do want to apologize. As the city clerk mentioned, the website is down. It is a remarkably challenging situation to fix. Not as easy as one would think. We are on it and doing our best to get it back live. In addition, I just want to also announce that tomorrow will be the first night of the Capitola Leadership Academy. We have 21 participants this year, which means it's one of the larger classes we've seen in a number of years. So we're really looking forward to doing that process with some folks who want to become more involved with the city.
Any other staff comments? Seeing none, I'll bring it to council comments, and we'll start with Council Member Bertrand.
Thank you, Mayor. So I just want to thank Roy McBroom to come to the City Council Zoom meeting and talk about his concern. I've been concerned about that also. I recently brought it up last week with our Director of Public Works. And I brought this up multiple times in the past because I noticed a lot of students that go to the junior high across the street from us, they take that route. So you're not the only one. Some of the kids that come through there, and they also skateboard. So I appreciate your comments and your detail of the comments. It's a problem. We have a great one on Park Avenue, but when they go underneath the freeway, as you just described, it is a problem. And so thank you again for your participation. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Council Member Bertrand. Any other council members have comments? Seeing no hands raised, I wanted to make a comment, and this is in reference to Officer Alvarado from the Salinas Police Department, which last Friday night was killed during a routine traffic stop. And I just want to extend to his family and the Salinas Police Department our most heartfelt condolences for their loss. And I did note that some of our officers went to the academy with Officer Alvarado, and so I want to extend our sympathies for them, and also encourage if there's any ways that we could help reach out and support the Salinas Police Department, as well as the members of the Capitola Police Department. After this tragic event, I certainly would like to hear from Chief Daly ways that we could do that, and at the appropriate time, if nothing else, to maybe send a letter of support to the Salinas Police Department. And I know that, and as Jamie has done, had put the flag down at half-mast, and which will be that way until his memorial service. And hopefully we can be kept informed about when that may be. So I just want to, and unfortunately wanted to acknowledge that and share, our sympathies to the Salinas Police Department. So those are my thoughts or comments this evening. And with that, let's move on to the consent items. The consent items will be handled in one motion unless any council members wish to pull it for further discussion. There's only one item this evening on consent, and that's the fiscal year 22-23 budget calendar. So what's the will of the council?
I'll move approval of the consent calendar.
There's a motion to approve. Is there a second?
I can second that.
Okay. There's a motion and a second. Can we have a roll call vote, Chloe?
Councilmember Bertrand.
I approve.
Councilmember Brooks.
Aye.
Councilmember Peterson.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Kaiser.
Aye.
Mayor Story.
Aye. And the consent agenda passes unanimously, which brings us to our general government public hearing portion of the meeting this evening. That will be a presentation and on the 22-23 budget principles and council goals. The recommended action is to adopt the fiscal year 22-23 budget principles and goals and identify related key projects and programs. Can we have a staff report, please?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Story. And thank you, council, for approving the budget calendar. I will coordinate with the city clerk to get that onto all of our city calendars. And we'll take one moment to share my screen. Does that look okay, Larry?
Yes, that looks great.
Thank you. So by way of background, as you're all well aware, each year we prepare and adopt a budget which provides the city council direction regarding our day-to-day functions and establishes the framework for our delivery of services to the community. Adopting budget goals and principles and identifying some key projects establishes some metrics in which we can measure performance. And it also helps clearly articulate the council's priorities to the residents. So budget principles, goals, and key projects. Principles provide the overarching guide to budget development, where goals look at a high-level look and how to implement the budget to comply with the principles. And then key projects drill down a little bit deeper into line item detail within the budget to achieve the budget goals underneath those budget principles. And these three together help focus staff and the city council on the important stuff that we have ahead of us. So as far as high-level budget principles, we basically have three. We have fiscal policy, public service, and public improvement principles. As far as fiscal policy principles, those consist of maintaining a balanced budget that ensures ongoing expenditures can be met with ongoing revenues, use one-time revenues for one-time expenditures, and ensure the budget plans for future cost increases and attainable revenue estimates. Public service principles consist of maintaining and improving upon the transparency of city operations and government accessibility. Recognize the high priority that the community places on the public's safety, and analyze future service level increases with their long-term financial impacts to ensure fiscal stability. Public improvement principles consist of maintaining the city's infrastructure by providing maximum funding for the pavement management system, maintain and improve Capitola's natural resources and sustainable green programs, and ensure maintenance and cleanliness of city facilities, sidewalks, and streets. So I'd like to give a little bit of a status update on last year's goals before we start talking about next year. So we had develop options for council consideration to address rising Calpers costs. We've had some conversations on the fact, and that's an ongoing project that we continue to try to figure out how to attack that one. Working with the Finance Advisory Committee to identify future revenue options. That's also ongoing. Continue working with the Capitola Mall ownership group for redevelopment of the mall. That's currently on hold due to the pandemic. Work towards Coastal Commission certification of the zoning code update. Our Community Development Department completed that in May of 2021. Our COVID-19 response, we have a few things as far as response. First is administer CDBG grant funds, which is ongoing. And just to put a little context to that, so far we've gotten about $244,000 of grants out to the community. $150,000 was for small businesses and $94,000 between Second Harvest, Community Bridges, and Gray Bears. And we still have more money. We're still getting more additional funding out as we can. Collaborating with regional partners on the state rental assistance program. That is an ongoing project right now. Maintain City Hall operation protocols to ensure health and safety of the public as well as the staff. That is ongoing and changes as cases change and CDC recommendations and the state recommendations change. And then working with the local restaurateurs to establish parameters for the temporary outdoor dining. That was completed early last fiscal year as far as the temporary stuff. Transition from COVID-19 back to normal operations. Again, that one's kind of an ongoing thing where we keep adjusting based on CDC, state, and county recommendations. But we are continually monitoring revenues and expenditures. We have explored grant opportunities for public safety, capital improvement program, environmental policies, and outreach programs. Right now we have Community Development Department is working on an active CDBG application that would cover 3 years of food assistance for the community. The police department has received a tobacco grant and will be applying for an alcohol grant. Those grants are both for enforcement as well as education. Reviewing parklets or outdoor dining. And as you recall, our sidewalk and street dining ordinance was adopted in December of 21 and is currently under review by the Coastal Commission. And the other piece of that was to review the village parking program once we kind of figured out the street dining. So we'll be bringing that. I believe we're actually going to kind of refresh that at the next council meeting and get that going again. The next one, make available free feminine hygiene products for all public restrooms. That project's been completed. Expand the emergency response planning and pursue grants for a city hall generator. We have received $300,000 grant, and we've also added $90,000 from our facility fund, and that project is in progress. Have city council create set priorities for community grants. We've gone through the study, and those results will be presented to city council next month in April. Seeking a partnership with the school district regarding the soccer field. So the recreation staff and the school district have been working towards a revised agreement for the community center, but with COVID restrictions, the soccer field is kind of on the back burner right now. But once we get through that agreement on the community center, then we'll kind of revive the soccer field project again, or conversation at least. Partnership with Scotts Valley regarding recreation, summer programs and services. The city council in Scotts Valley decided to go a different direction and work with a nonprofit. So we didn't do anything, but that one is technically complete. Update our admin policies. We've done a number over the past year, and we still have a long list that still need to get through. So that'll be ongoing, or at least recommended to be ongoing. Monterey Park picnic tables, we'll have that completed before the end of this fiscal year. Our signage from Pack Cove lots to the beach in the village, that's been completed. Our implicit bias training for staff, we've had 2 training sessions so far. The third was just rescheduled for early June, so we will have that done by the end of this fiscal year. Prioritize our affordable housing and building community relationships. So on this, we've updated the inclusionary housing ordinance. We've completed the affordable housing nexus study and feasibility study, and we've adopted new affordable housing in lieu fees and impact fees. The community or building community relationships is ongoing. The community development department's been working on that and continues to work on that. My guess will be kind of an ongoing constant. As far as capital improvement projects, we had the 41st Avenue Adaptive Signal. That is grant funded and currently in construction. We have the Monterey and Park Railroad Station Park and Pathway. The pathway is in design. It's also funded, and then the rest of that RTC funding will follow, I think, for the park piece of it sometime in the future. Pavement Management Program, that's ongoing. They're working on that now. We kind of work on that every year, and we fund it annually based on available resources. Rispin Park, as you recall, at the mid-year, we funded that project, and we'll bid that out later this spring. The utility undergrounding there at Bay Avenue and Cap Ave, we're working with PG&E, and the undergrounding is funded. And then we also have the roundabout design at the same intersection. That'll follow the utility undergrounding sometime to be determined in the future. And as of right now, just the pre-design and the outreach is funded. The Warf Improvement Project, Steve reported last week, the phase 1 is completed. Phase 2 can be bid out this summer, pending city council direction. And as you recall, currently we have about 4.7 million available. The full project that was presented last week is 7 million. And then Steve presented some options that kind of fall in between that 4.7 and $7 million range that we can discuss a little bit later. Claire's pedestrian improvements is in design and will be bid out this spring. It's fully funded. And then the last 4 there, the Cap Ave sidewalk, Capitola Library, Flume Rehab, and Jetty Rehab were all completed this past fiscal year. And that kind of covers the high-arching budget principles and last year's goals. So I'm going to turn it over to City Manager Goldstein and start looking forward to next year.
James,
Yes.
well, before we get into the next phase, I wanted to maybe put it out to council and see if they had any questions about what you have just reviewed, Jim.
Sure.
So looks like we have Councilmember Brooks.
Thank you, Mayor Story. Just a couple questions about some of the items like the implicit bias training and the funding for like free feminine hygiene. Are we to assume that this is going to continue into the next year, or I just can't remember where we left off? So as you know, when we start talking about priorities, whether it's to assume that yes, there will be free hygiene products for all of our bathrooms in the next years to come. So that's my first question.
That's my understanding, is that the dispensers have all been installed, and then our maintenance folk keep them fully, or not fully stocked, but keep them stocked as needed.
Okay, great. And then for the implicit bias training, Jamie, you might have to help me remember, did we decide that we're going to continue to, did we create a timeline on how often we're going to be doing this, or?
So I don't, for general staff, we've entered a contract with Circle Up, and they've been providing the training for staff and our police officers. And so we're one training away from completing that scope of work. I think if we want it to be a recurring thing, I think we would need to make that decision. I don't think we've made a final decision about recurring training in that regard.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Councilmember Bertrand?
Thank you, Mayor. My question is about the Clare Street pedestrian improvements. So we're redoing Clare Street in general, right?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Yeah, the project includes repaving Clare Street from Warf Road to 41st and then installing various bike and pedestrian improvements.
Okay, so in a sense, that's a project that's been approved. It just wasn't on the list, so that's why I'm asking. That's all.
Yeah, so we're calling it the Clare Street Pedestrian. I think that's what it was called originally. It's definitely morphed beyond that, but it is a fully complete street project.
Okay, thanks. That's my major question. And okay, I'll save my other question now that you're on, Steve. I'm glad to see, because I want to talk about the Park Avenue issue. Thanks.
Questions from any other council members? Seeing none. Jim, I did have a question concerning the partnership with the school district over the soccer, regarding the soccer field. Which soccer field are we talking about? The one at Jade Street or Monterey Park?
Believe Monterey Park.
The Monterey Park, okay. I think maybe if we could just, clarify that on our chart so we know.
Will do.
Okay, with that, Jamie, you want to pick it up from there?
Yeah, I will. I just, in looking at this list and the conversation about Park Avenue, I do think we missed a project. Steve, can you chime in here? We put funding into a Park Avenue. I know you have something in design right now for some options to improve bike lanes on Park Avenue.
We do. We have a traffic calming project, but it does focus on, I would say, from Coronado to Monterey. We didn't really look at the freeway. We could actually bring that in as part of this project under the freeway if we wanted to, but there is $100,000. We have one preliminary design. We're trying to get a couple options before we return to council.
Okay. I apologize for missing that one on that list, but that is another project that's in the works that does have funding. Okay.
If I may, Mayor, if I may just make a comment.
Yeah, go ahead, Councilmember Bertrand.
Yeah, so RTC is going to be funding improvements in bike lanes on SoCal. And, I brought this subject up because I didn't know where the city boundaries were when we discussed this at the RTC. So the same issue going on at the freeway overpass. And I don't know if there's going to be more traffic, but I can anticipate more traffic if SoCal gets improvements. And, that whole section, there's a good bike lane on either side of the freeway, but going underneath that overpass, I do think is problematic. So Steve, if that could be included, that'd be great. And I did not ask Rory to make a comment. I'm glad he did, though. It's nice to know that the public has the same concern.
I think we can leapfrog and not bring in the area where the eucalyptus trees are, but we could certainly bring in the Caltrans property and look at our improvements there. So that is all in Caltrans right away, but we are responsible for the Park Avenue improvements that go through there.
Okay, well, I look to you to manage that. Thank you very much, though.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, are we ready to proceed?
Yes.
Okay. So we're proposing a little bit of a different structure than we have done in the past for this goal setting. And one of the things I thought might be helpful is to take a look back at our mid-year report that we just did a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago, and remind everybody about the resources that we identified that exist within the city budget. So you'll recall that we ended up after the mid-year adjustments with about $2.4 million of general fund balance, and that's including the $600K in the COVID reserve account. So it's 1.8 at this point, sort of pure general fund, and then $600K in the COVID account. In addition, we have about $250,000 more in the American Rescue Plan that we have not yet accounted for that is available to be allocated to projects. Next year's budget will include around $1.1 million in Measure F funding. You'll recall Measure F was the voter-approved initiative that was intended to be dedicated towards sort of our infrastructure facing the beach. That $1.1 million is a rough estimate. We haven't done our budget estimates yet for next year, but that's probably in the ballpark of where it'll end up. In addition, you'll remember that we had identified a certain amount of ongoing revenue at the mid-year. I think it was around $675K or so, and we appropriated about $300K of that for this year. So there is another chunk of unallocated ongoing revenue that is available at this time to allocate to key projects that the council's looking to implement. And then we're going to go into the budget process. And when we go into the budget process, we'll be looking at, another estimate of this year's revenues and expenditures, and then our estimates for next year. And so I can't tell you how much there may be carryover from this year or what the resources will be in next year. But setting that aside for a moment, we have about $4.13 million of fund balance or funding that can be allocated towards key projects at this time. In the past, we've sort of operated with around a $500,000 fund balance target. Given the level of uncertainty, I think just with where we are right now, I would suggest probably aiming for something higher, maybe a $750,000 fund balance target. Or alternatively, we could aim for hypothetically take the COVID account down a little bit and then aim for the $500,000 fund balance target. But if you do that, that leaves around $3.4 million available to dedicate towards key projects and goals. So when Jim presented the progress on the different goals from last year, we have a number of them that we would recommend carrying over to this next fiscal year. They include looking at the Calpers costs. It's been an ongoing challenge for a long period of time, and we do actually have potentially a key project to help address that. Continue to work with the Finance Advisory Committee on future revenue options. And you'll note we also have the parking rate discussion that'll be coming in front of council, which is related to that. And in addition, you'll see a potential work plan goal for next year to think about a ballot initiative, whether we want to do that coming up in the 22 November election. The mall obviously remains a high priority for the city. Of course, until the developers are prepared to move a project forward, we are in a bit of a holding pattern, but I think it should remain as a goal. I would recommend it remaining as a goal for the city. Continuing to respond to COVID. I'm hopeful, as I was a year ago at this time, that we are moving beyond this, but our hopes have been dashed in the past. So I think we just need to continue to monitor the situation. Again, moving forward with the transition back to normal operations. And continue to seek grants, whether it's in public safety for our CIP, our environmental programs, our community outreach, CDBG, et cetera. Next slide, please. As I've mentioned, we're going to start the conversation about village parking rates at our next meeting. It's not going to be a final decision for anybody who's tuning in. It'll be just sort of a work plan and going through different options for the work plan for council consideration. The community grants project has been an ongoing one. And that is, I think we have in April, the hearing with our consultants who's going to start sort of diving into our process and looking at some of our priorities. I think that the partnership with the school district around the potential soccer field at Monterey Park should remain a priority. Obviously, at this point, we need to maybe focus first on the Jade Street properties. And once we get that done, then we can look over at Monterey Park. Continue the update of the admin policies. Continue to prioritize the affordable housing projects. You'll recall that we received $2 million in repaid affordable housing loans in this last year. So we do have resources to assist with key affordable housing projects should they crop up, and then complete the CIP projects, keep them moving forward. So none of those were new. Those were all from the prior year. There's definitely some heavy lifts in there. The community grants, I don't think anybody assumes is going to be an easy process, and village parking is always a robust debate. So there's a fair amount of work associated with getting those items done. Then in addition, I put out a few sort of first draft proposals on kind of work plan items. Now, the idea behind these is that they may involve a lot of staff time, council time, community outreach, but often they don't involve a huge amount of cost. So the housing element update is going to be a very significant work effort for us this next year. Councilmember Peterson has kept us abreast of the current situation with the RHNA housing allocation from AMBAG, and it's going to be a challenge to find spots to accommodate all those units that we're apparently going to be assigned. Enhancing community outreach. There's a number of different ideas that my staff has. I think it's a priority for this council and certainly for me to always try to be finding ways to better communicate with the public. And I think that that's something we should always keep our eye on. The regional bike share program has been something that our planning staff has been working hard on, coordinating with the county, the cities of Santa Cruz, Watsonville, and Scotts Valley, as well as UCSC. We are hopeful that we'll be able to bring a proposed contract with a regional vendor to the council coming up here, hopefully in the next 6 months. Comprehensive fee study. This is something that we do in our finance department. I think the goal is to do it every 5 years, and it's due again. The hope is to do it in-house rather than bringing a consultant in, which reduces costs, but obviously is a workload issue. The November ballot. November ballot is any items that we would want to consider putting on. We have to decide on that by the end of July. I know that before the 2020 general election, we had a conversation about whether we wanted to put a tax measure on and ultimately decided to defer it given the situation with the pandemic. So I would suggest, if council agrees, that this could be something that we would agendize for a future meeting and have a dive into whether or not we want to talk about ballot measures for the November election. Memorial bench program. This is something that needs some work. Most of our memorial benches are old. My staff has some ideas, some revisions to the program to bring to council in the coming year. We want to get more parking enforcement done with bikes, and the police department has some plans around that. And then interesting kind of inside baseball is we do need to update our special event permit process. Right now we have a host of different code sections and policies that govern how these things are issued, and I think we can achieve some streamlining and some consistency improvements by fixing that. With all of these projects, like I said before, it's mostly a staff time thing. Probably the biggest cost associated with these would be obviously the housing element update, which can be funded with our dedicated general plan update fund, as well as the potential funding should we decide to look into ballot measures for potentially community polling, to take a look at where the community, their feedback about different ideas that we might have for the November election. Next item, please. So those were the carryover and the kind of the new work plan ideas that I wanted to toss out. And then in addition, now we have some projects to consider allocating funding to. This wouldn't be a allocation of funding. This is sort of the first step in the budgeting process, but if we can get the guidance now, we can prepare a draft budget that reflects the council's goals. So you'll recall, as Jim mentioned, and we had a hearing on last meeting, that we're about $2.3 million away from full funding, about $2 million away from funding everything except for the floating docks. We could obviously scale the project back further if it's the council's desire to do so. However, there is an economy of scale, is once you have a marine contractor mobilized and on site, there's a decent argument, and also the permits. It's a very complicated regulatory environment working on the wharf, that once you're there, you want to get the job done. The community center. Council is aware that we are in negotiations about a lease extension for with the school district for the community center in Jade Street Park. The community center needs a lot of work. There's sort of near-term needs, the things that really need to be addressed soon, probably between $150,000 and $400,000. The building itself potentially needs maybe a complete renovation, and that's probably in the $1 to $2 million range. But that's a rough number at this point. The library tot lot, that's a discussion I did not include in the staff report. I was remiss to have missed it. It came up at a recent meeting when we were talking about the closeout of the library project. And this would be for enhancements to the tot lot, improvements, redoing the tot lot at the library. Local hazard mitigation projects. Last meeting, Steve gave us a good in-depth review of kind of what's in our hazard mitigation project, reminded all of us. And, there's a number of projects that I would suggest we should think about kicking off. One is something that, the city hall is in the floodplain. We flooded once. The building is in dire need of repair. Do we want to take a look at making a plan? Figuring out, is this the site where we're sitting and we're going to figure out a way to abate the flood risk, or are we going to try to relocate? So the suggestion here is to fund maybe a third party to come in and help facilitate a bit of a dialogue and a pros and cons analysis to come up with what our long-term plan would be for City Hall. Stockton Bridge, that's called out as, I think, one of the other highest risk things in the LHMP. And we did the initial study on that to identify the options to improve Stockton Bridge. And I think that there's a number of different options that can start getting funded around the 350 range, all the way up to a complete new bridge that would be spanning the creek entirely and wouldn't have legs down in the water anymore that potentially catch logs in high flow. We talked about this in the LHMP presentation we got last meeting, sort of potentially kicking off a study to look at what the options would be around the bluff and the cliff drive slope stability. And again, another item that we discussed briefly was doing some engineering feasibility analysis about what we can do with Noble Gulch. And lastly, called out again in the LHMP, is fire risk reduction. Fire is always a concern, growing concern in California for sure. And the city does manage a number of eucalyptus groves, and that is another spot where we could put money in managing that and putting more resources into managing the eucalyptus groves and reducing fire hazard there. Next slide, please. It's a little incongruous to talk about maintaining City Hall and then also talking about a study for a new City Hall, but the current building is in pretty bad shape. I don't know that $100,000 is the minimum, but the building is tottering at this point. And so I do think that we could consider putting some money in to the facility just to tide us over, because regardless of what we do, we're probably 4 to 5 years out from anything really happening. So we are stuck with what we've got for a bit of time. McGregor Sidewalk is an exceptionally expensive project. Council historically has talked about this as being a safe way, a pedestrian path to get to McGregor Park. There are ways to go not on the street if people kind of traverse through New Brighton State Park, but they're pretty informal. It's a shockingly expensive sidewalk, really, because it's effectively a bridge. The pathway, the sidewalk would have to be basically hanging out over a retaining wall. And then there's a number of projects that we could consider from our climate action plan. Climate action plan talks about trying to increase community charging stations. I think electric vehicle sales doubled in 2021 compared to 2020 in California. California is the leader nationwide in electric vehicle sales, and I think that the demand for charging stations is only going to grow. They run around $10,000 of each, and I think that is a concrete step we could take to help encourage folks to transition to electric vehicles. The roundabout at Bay Avenue and Cap Ave, that and the signal timing project are called out as two sort of infrastructure changes the city could make to help with the carbon reduction. The signal timing project is obviously in construction on 41st, and that has a significant impact. The roundabout at Bay Avenue and Capitola would have one as well. It's a heavy lift, though. It's a lot of money. And then we're suggesting improving sort of the overall bike conditions, and we could we're suggesting potentially $50,000. You could put more in to start addressing and trying to go through the city and do what we can to improve bikeways throughout the city. Peary Park Bridge maintenance, you'll recall we did an emergency repair to that bridge, but Steve thinks that there's probably some other long-term repairs we could make. Something I wanted to put on your radar, about $100,000 there. The bike park was constructed more than 5 years ago now, and it's time for it to be renovated. We do think we have a potential donor and a potential grant that could be used to do that. So I don't think it needs a general fund allocation at this time, but I do think it's something we could include that is as a key project for that grant and donation funding. And then right now, our Calpers Trust, which is one of the tools that we're using to sort of stave off some of the worst impacts of potential increases to our pension rates, as well as a potential bridge to manage the construction of the mall when that project happens. I believe we established a target of 1 year funding in that fund, and we're about $1 million short at this point of that 1 year funding in the Calpers Trust. And then lastly, pavement management. Pavement management is a never-ending need in the city. We do have the SB1, the RTC funding, fair number of dedicated sources that now come in for pavement management, but there's always more need. So there's always the ability of the council to put more funding into pavement management. So those are all the ideas that I've heard, and those are ideas that have been either discussed by the council, previous budget sessions, staff has identified as real needs, things that have come up in recent discussions. So we are trying to attach kind of rough budget pictures to all of those different sort of key projects for council to think about. So for this evening, what we're hoping for is to get council action to confirm the high-level budget principles. Those are the ones we've been operating under for a number of years. Confirm the carryover goals. We could obviously cut out something that we said we were going to do last year that isn't done yet, if council thinks it's no longer a priority. But it would look for a motion to carry over those goals or make changes if council so wishes. Take a look at the work plan goals that staff has suggested and hopefully approve by motion those work plan goals. And if council has any that they would like to add to that, to do so. And then my suggestion would be to identify the top key projects for funding. And it doesn't have to be as granular as everything on that list. Hypothetically, council could say, let's fund the Warf, let's get that done, and then let's put a third of the remaining project in LHMP hazard reduction, a third of the project in climate goals, and a third of the project in, dealing with the PERS situation. And then we could come back with the specifics and different projects and line items in the budget. So that concludes my presentation. I'm available for questions.
Councilmember Peterson.
Thank you, Mayor Short. And I think City Manager Goldstein might have just answered my question in his last sentence there, but I just wanted to confirm. So there's a lot of projects here that have varying amounts of funding. I mean, one of them, I think it said it could be anywhere from $250,000 to $350,000 to $4 million for Stockton Bridge reinforcement. So based on what you just said, it sounds like we could just say tonight, yes, Stockton Bridge reinforcement is one of our priorities. We want it in the budget. And then staff would come back and say, hey, we can put this much towards it, or this is what we're anticipating it would cost in phases. And we can get down to the, like you said, the nitty gritty of the exact amount we want to allocate when the budget comes back to us. And right now we're just looking at the higher level goals overall, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that's a really good example, the Stockton Bridge. We completed the study and it identified probably 2 or 3 fixes. And this is based on my memory from probably 4 years ago. So if we said, look, let's put some money towards that, really what would happen is we would come back, and whether it's in the budget or actually a separate hearing on that, and say, okay, we have $300,000 for Stockton Bridge. Here's what the different options are in the study. There's the near-term fix, the longer-term fix. Do we want to save up for the longer term? And we can make that decision. We don't need to make that decision. Frankly, you don't have all the information to make that granular level of a decision this evening.
Exactly. And then my other question is for our ongoing goals, to support carrying those over, do we need to identify funding for those still? Or I know you showed us a list and some of them have funding and some of them are partially funded. And so again, tonight, all we would need to do is say, yes, we want to confirm those are still our goals. And then we would later determine how much of the remaining fund balance would go to those ongoing goals as opposed to the new ones, right?
That's correct. At this point, most of those ongoing goals are more work plan associated, work plan intensive. And so they don't need significant budget allocations. But if you do confirm these are your ongoing goals, we will look in the budget and see whether or not we do need to include some budget allocations in the draft budget for them.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Councilmember Bertrand.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Just sort of remind me, City Manager, in terms of Calpers, when we put money into that fund, and depending on the amount we put in, do we potentially save money? I mean, I remember at one time we did pay off with a bond because we wanted to save money. We knew we had to pay. So what's Calpers telling us right now? We know we're in deficit. So what is, an appropriate fiscal way to manage that deficit at this time?
Sure, that's a great question, Councilmember Bertrand. So the issue for those of you who are tuning in for the first time is that there's an unfunded liability at Calpers. That is for obligations, retirement obligations the city has accrued in the past, and this goes back 30 years. There's not enough money in the account for them. And so Calpers has put in place basically a plan for us to get there, to put all the money in. And what that included after the Great Recession was a phase-in, as they called it, to sort of ramp up our payment for that unfunded liability over time. And I remember when that happened, looking at it and seeing how much it was going to ramp up over time and looking ahead to 2022 or 2023 and thinking, oh my God, how are we going to ever afford that? Well, we've done that. And so we're making those annual payments on the unfunded liability. And so the ramp up, we're nearing the peak of that ramp up payment. And in theory, and please don't hold me to this, in theory, what will happen is that then payment will look more like a debt payment and it'll just be the same amount every year in the budget, which is much easier to deal with than a figure that's growing by $250,000 every year. So that's the situation. And what we've done about it is we've established what's called a 115 trust, which basically lets the city set aside money and invest it in the stock market that is dedicated to paying that obligation. So the money that's in the 115 trust can't be used to fund general city obligations. It can only be used to pay that Calpers debt. But the money we've put there, we're getting a market rate returns on. So what we're suggesting at this time is at least consider putting some chunk of our money into that trust. We haven't done it in a number of years. It's been growing pretty significantly over time. And that then can be used to pay that unfunded liability with Calpers.
Okay, so that's what you're proposing. Okay, I have another question in regards to the Stockton Bridge. And in general, the climate mitigation issues that we've already identified through city planning and community development, rather. If we do anything to the bridge, shouldn't we be doing something in recognition that the whole Esplanade and potentially up the river are going to have issues related to sea level rise? We can't do it independently of those issues. That's my question.
Well, so keep in mind that the primary issue with the bridge is that it has these two legs that stick in the creek. And those two legs act as dams, if you will, when large logs come down. So the issues with the bridge are less about the water coming from the ocean and more about the water coming from the hills. So the fixes that were studied in the Stockton Bridge assessment were really looking at ways to mitigate the risk of flooding from the mountains and not from coastal, not from being inundated by sea level rise. And so they included, I think, specific Steve can go into details if we need to, but like deflector walls around those legs in the creek. were one, that was, I think, the lower cost option that was identified in the study. And then the higher cost option, which is probably unattainable for a variety of reasons, would be to do a new bridge and then span the creek entirely and not have those legs that potentially catch logs.
Okay, yeah, I remember when that report came and you just reminded me in terms of the deflector areas. So I was thinking, I guess, mostly in terms of if we built a new bridge with the recognition that we are going to have issues with sea level rise and the whole issue of mitigation. So it's mostly reflective of my concern for that. If we're going to do any kind of work on the bridge, we'd have to do something with that in mind as well. That's all. So I don't think we're going to go that far after what you said. We probably don't have the money for it. So thank you. I think that's it.
Okay, any other council members have questions? Let's see, Vice Mayor Kaiser.
Thank you, Mayor. City Manager, I had a question about the Calpers. I feel like there was a sentence, and I could have totally just misheard you, but that it was sort of lumped into something to do with the mall rehabilitation too, or did I hear that weird?
You did. You actually heard that right.
Oh, okay. Can you elaborate on that? Sorry.
No, that's actually a good question, and I don't know that we've discussed this. I've discussed this before. This may be an internal strategy that Jim and I have developed. So you'll remember, or you may not have been on council at this time, but when we've been looking at the mall redevelopment, the city has identified the project would take several years to complete, which means that the city would not be getting revenue off the mall. There's potentially impact to some of the existing stores. So I don't remember exactly what we identified the cost, but we think that there's probably $1 million cost. Like if they came in and said, hey, we're going to do this big mall redevelopment, we'd say, great, but we're going to lose $1 million of revenue over the next 3 years while you ramp this project up. And so I think we've talked about trying to come up with a plan to deal with that. And that's been the thinking that Jim and I have had is that this Calpers trust, particularly if it's coming at the peak of the Calpers costs, could be used to pay our Calpers bills through that mall redevelopment period, which helps us bridge from one side to the other, and then the mall is done and the revenues start coming in. So that's a little bit of our thinking. It's an interesting question about when would you use a trust like this, because ideally what you would do is you'd use it to smooth out the peak in the Calpers costs, but to smooth out a peak, you have to know when you're actually at the top. You don't want to get in the habit of start using the trust to pay your Calpers every year, and then you eventually use up the trust, and suddenly it's a general fund hit because you haven't been using the fund. So trying to figure out the timing and the best way to utilize the trust is a little bit of a challenge. And we've thought that the mall redevelopment might be the appropriate way, and the timing might be good because it might sync up with the Calpers peak costs.
Okay, cool. Thank you for the clarification. Appreciate it.
Sure.
But Jamie, just a quick follow-up on that strategy. Wouldn't the hypothetical $1 million be needed to backfill the general fund? If we're losing $1 million in revenue, it means we have $1 million hole in the general fund.
Well, so the general fund currently pays the Calpers UAL. So we would be relieving the general fund of $1 million obligation.
Responsibility. I see. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Bertrand.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just have one question I forgot to ask. There's the issue of studying eucalyptus in terms of fire safety. So I was just wondering what eucalyptus this is going to be. We have eucalyptus in the wrist bend. We have eucalyptus along Park Avenue, which is probably largely owned by the RTC. And also off of Park Avenue, there's a whole swath along that little creek that's owned by the state. And so I'm just wondering, and then there's up Park Avenue near the freeway, there's a bunch of eucalyptus that we own too. So I was just wondering what's being anticipated here. And if it's with joint owners like RTC or the state, could we reach out to them and do it together? That's my question.
I'll defer to Steve on this one. He's given more thought into what this project would look like.
So there's probably three areas. Along Park Avenue, the RTC has recently completed a survey of their boundary. So we've identified some of the eucalyptus trees along Park Avenue where you overlook the Monterey Bay that are city trees and have them evaluated. There's the eucalyptus grove between Park Avenue and Balboa that's predominantly city property that we go in there and clean out. So that would be the second property. And the third property where we have had fire concerns is the Courtyard property down along by the Brookvale Terrace Mobile Home Park. We've gone in there and done some more, but there's probably some more fire suppression work that we could do down in that area. I'm not sure it's fully eucalyptus trees, but that's another area of concern.
So you're not worried about the Rispin area?
Well, Brisbane has a lot of issues. The trees along the street we have recently had evaluated for structural issues, but from a fire endpoint, it's so covered in ivy right now. I'm not sure, but it's certainly an area that is thick with eucalyptus trees.
Okay, any other questions? Yeah, I had some questions. Jamie, starting from the recap of our 21-22 mid-year and the expected minimum total available of 4.135 million. Does that include the surplus from the library project?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Now going to looks like carryover projects. The one is the Noble Gulch engineering feasibility analysis. Is that the one concerning the storm drains in Noble Gulch? Yeah, or is that something different?
I'll turn this one back over to Steve.
Yeah, that's looking at options. We have the Noble Gulch pipe that failed in 2011, still has 10-year capacity. So it'd be looking at what options there are to increase the flood protection around that pipeline.
And this was that, and we talked about it when you did the presentation on the local hazard mitigation plan. Yes,
that's correct, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, got it. Thank you. And then under carryovers, bike park renovation. I wasn't quite sure what that is.
So the bike park, the pump track, was built with
oh, the pump track. Okay.
pump track.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was thinking of parking bikes.
Nope, the pump track. That's yes. Bike park is a new term for us, isn't it? We don't usually use that.
And okay, those were my questions. And I'm thinking, it looks like we have 4 tasks that staff has asked us to do. So I was thinking of just maybe taking them one by one. The first one is to confirm our budget principles as previously presented. Well, maybe this should be the time. Maybe I should just check in with the public and see if anybody in the public wishes to make a comment on the staff presentation. And so I'll take it out to the public. If you would like to speak, raise your hand on Zoom, or you can dial *9. You'll have 3 minutes, or you can write an email to us at publiccomments@ci.capitola.ca.us.
Mayor Story, I do not see anyone in the audience raising their hand to speak on this item, and we have not received any emails.
Okay, I'll bring it back then and pick it off with a discussion and approval of the budget principles as identified on page 6 and 7 of our agenda packet. Any comments or questions about that? And Councilmember Peterson.
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm that you want a separate motion for each one of these. Like you want a motion first to confirm the budget principles, and then we'll move on to.
Well, I was thinking that would be the most orderly way to proceed, is maybe having a motion on each topic area. And that way, you know, we can be sure to cover them all and do so, you know, in step by step.
You got it. In that case, I will make a motion to confirm our high level budget principles.
I'll second.
Yeah, okay, we have a motion and a second. That's fine. I did want to, I guess, make a request or a recommendation on the topic of public improvement principles, and the very last principle where it says ensure maintenance and cleanliness of city facilities, sidewalks, and streets. And I'm thinking that we should also include the word safety, so that it reads ensure maintenance, cleanliness, and safety of city facilities, sidewalks, and streets. Now I know we do reference public safety under public service principles, but to me, that's a different kind of public safety. I would think it's just important that we use safety as a criteria for evaluating, you know, any improvements or updates or repairs to our city facilities. So if there's any support for that.
That sounds good to me. I'll add that to my motion, or if staff wants to add that into the budget principles, then my motion stands with the amendment, whatever's most appropriate, but I support that.
Thank you, Councilmember Peterson. Does the seconder support that amendment to the motion?
Yes, Mayor Story.
Thank you, Councilmember Brooks. So with that, do any council members wish to make comments on the motion? Seeing none, Chloe, I ask for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bertrand.
I agree.
Councilmember Brooks.
Aye.
Councilmember Peterson.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Kaiser.
Aye.
Mayor Story.
Aye. And that motion passes unanimously, which would bring us to the second component, which is to confirm the carryover goals. I guess I'll just ask council members if they feel any particular of the former goals need to be either amended or removed.
Can we bring him up?
Councilmember Brooks.
Thank you, Mayor Story. I would like to make a motion to well, now you've changed the screen on me, but to approve the to approve the carryover goals from the 21-22 year to 22-23 year, with the amendment on the item that states explore grant opportunities for public safety, CIP, and environmental policies and outreach programs, CDBG, generator, etc. Because there's a lot of etc. there. I would just like to be clear that we add in youth and early education opportunities or grants related to youth and educational opportunities for programming in that particular carryover goal.
I'll second that one.
So we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion by council members? Seeing none. Would a council member like to take a, I guess there would be time for a roll call vote, Chloe?
Councilmember Bertrand,
I agree.
Councilmember Brooks,
Aye.
Councilmember Peterson,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Kaiser,
Aye.
Mayor Story.
Aye, and that motion passes unanimously, which would bring us to the third segment of our efforts this evening, and that is to identify the 22-23 work plan goals. And we have the list on page 10 and 11 of the potential public improvement and fiscal goals. I mean, if you want, if it would help, maybe, Councilmember Peterson, yes.
Yeah, I think if we're looking for, high level overarching goals, everything that's on this slide here, based on what it says, is that these projects can be completed with a budget allocation of about 50,000. So I think for one, I would suggest that we move forward with all of these on this slide. And then do you want me to move on with my thoughts on the key projects, or just stick with what I just said and wait?
Well, just for clarification, you're referring to the goals that are 50,000 and less, or?
Yeah, right here at the bottom of the slide, it says staff anticipates these projects can be completed with a budget allocation of approximately $50,000. And so I think that we should put all of the things on this slide on our work plan goals for the coming year, because we're not going to be digging into exact amounts tonight. And so I think that these are all pretty important.
Got it. Okay.
I'll second that. Sounds good.
Okay. We have a motion and a second, but I'm going to call on Councilmember Brooks at this time.
Great, thank you, Mayor Story. Just for clarification, if we're looking at page 10 at the bottom, so we have those update special events, and then below it are potential public improvement and fiscal goals. We are not talking about those. We're just talking about the 50,000. That's what the motion is made from Councilmember Peterson and Councilmember Bertrand, correct?
Well, yes, that's my understanding.
Okay.
It's the goals at the top of page 10 are the fiscal and public service goals.
Okay, and the motion would then present itself. We would see that at our next meeting with numbers next to it, Jamie, that then we would decide what we're moving forward with. Is that what you're anticipating by us approving the proposed work plan goals for 22-23 from staff?
So my expectation would be if this is the list coupled with the continued items from last year, then when we present the budget, we'll be putting in specific, making sure we have the resources to do these things. And then we're going to be doing each one of these things over the course of the next 14 months. So I don't think that we would be doing this same hearing again. The next hearing would be looking at the draft budget. And then we're going to be kicking off, for example, the ballot measures. I think one of the near-term meetings, we would probably come back. We would go into some detail about options for ballot measures and try to get council direction about whether or not we were going to do polling, things like that. So
Right.
Each one of these things, if you approve them, we would kind of kick off the work plan on them.
Okay, and then the next 3 slides with all of these other ideas that you've presented, we're going to talk about in this next item that for approval to bring
Yeah.
forward. Got
And
it. Okay.
the real difference between them is that those are kind of very much projects that need a lot of money, and these are
Right.
much more processes that take a lot of time.
Okay, so council members, if I may just bring some attention towards the bike share program. I was interested in creating a full safety program in addition to like a safe streets program, in addition to the bike share program, like an all-inclusive. So I don't know if you want me to add that into this because it's pretty specific here. Or we can just tack it on to the end. So I'm just looking for some input on the best way to proceed.
I have a question about that.
Yeah,
The-
go ahead, Councilmember Peterson.
Sure. So if it says the proposed work plan goal is to launch a regional bike share program, it sounds that's like our participation in something that is larger than just us. But it sounds like, if I'm understanding correctly, Councilmember Brooks, that you're talking about something that is just us, is Capitola wide. So of course I would definitely support that, but I'm wondering if maybe we should talk about that in the
Next
as
one.
a standalone item, yeah, so that it doesn't interfere
Okay.
with the regional aspect of this. That's just my my thoughts on it, but I do support the idea of a overall safe streets.
Okay.
program.
Yeah, I just don't want to miss my opportunity to bring that up during this particular time as we're talking about these things. So fair, I am fine with the motion that's on the table. Thank you very much for answering my questions.
Councilmember Bertrand?
Yeah, Councilwoman Brooks brought up something. I think our captain does a bike safety program with New Brighton. And I don't know how extensive it is, but I think Councilwoman Brooks is talking about something a little more extensive than what they have. And I think Captain Sarah Ryan is on. Maybe she could talk about that, or maybe this is not the time.
Well, I believe that what Councilmember Brooks was talking about was more kind of infrastructure safety. If
Oh, you mean bike lanes and
pathways,
painting and stuff? Okay.
right. Whereas what the Chief Daly and Captain Ryan do is more education and training, and education about bike regulations and laws. And so
Okay. Well, right now we get a lot of our funding from RTC, so yeah, I'll wait on that one. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, that is my understanding correct, Councilmember Brooks and Chief Daly?
Yeah, what I'm asking for is different. It's for the local community, similar to what the county that has is a safe streets programs where you see the slow signs, and it's a program already in existence, but something that we have not adopted in our particular city.
Right. Okay. All right. So with that, we have a motion and a second. And at this time, I'll ask for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bertrand.
I agree.
Councilmember Brooks.
Aye.
Councilmember Peterson.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Kaiser.
Aye.
Mayor Story.
Aye. And that motion passes unanimously, which will now bring us to the hard part. Identify key projects for funding, and we can use the list that's on now the bottom of page 10, the top of page 11, and of course not to preclude any other projects that council members may wish to have added to the list. And maybe if it's okay with council members, we could just maybe go down the list in order and speak to each one. And I believe we're also being asked to prioritize the list for the benefit of staff. So keep that in mind as well. So let's begin with the Warf Rehabilitation Project.
Mayor Story, I have a quick question.
Yes.
So I noticed that some of these, like the local hazard mitigation projects are, it's a general topic. And so if I'm interested in essentially all of the hazard mitigation projects, are we still looking to prioritize each of these projects individually based on funding amount? Or should I just say, I think we should prioritize local hazard mitigation projects and then have staff return to us with the feasibility of funding for each of these?
Well, Jamie, maybe I'll let you chime in to respond to that question. It wouldn't seem to me that we need to prioritize each separate item under local hazard mitigation, but it would be helpful for staff to know where that grouping kind of falls within the list.
Sure. So at this stage, really the goal here, from my perspective, from staff's perspective, is to get guidance in preparation of the budget. And so that high level feedback, like, look, hazard mitigation is an important priority, and let's take $300,000 that we have allocated and put it in there. If you see one of these projects and you think that's no good, we can't do that, that would be useful to know. So we don't spin our wheels and sort of develop it further in the budget. And again, conversely, if you see one of the projects and think that's definitely got to be something that happens, that would be helpful as well. But no, we don't need to go through each individual project. I think at the end of the day, what we're looking for is a motion that says, hey, let's do projects X, Y, and Z, and come back and take a look at them in the budget. And also, I mentioned this at the outset, but I do want to remind everybody that this is sort of the minimum available funding, and I do think in the budget we will be able to bring other resources out that can be also used as well. So this isn't the end of the line, if you will.
Did that answer your question, Councilmember Peterson?
It did. Thank you.
With that, I'll call on Councilmember Brooks.
Thank you, Mayor Story. So, okay, I'll take a stab at this and try to make it as easy as possible. I'm in agreement with the Warf Rehabilitation Program and trying, as you know, because I can't do all the math on where we are with the full budget. So I'd like to see the Warf project fully funded. I think it would be great to see the community center, to see how close we can get to 400,000 and what we can get for that amount of money. The local hazard mitigation projects, I'm on board with all of those. What I think we would have to do is start at the lowest end of the scale if we wanted to see all those done with that. So the minimal city hall maintenance, like you said, Jamie, 100,000 is 100,000. It would be interesting to see what we get, but of course I'm 100% on board with that. The McGregor sidewalk, it is a dream. It is expensive. That is not on the top of my list as of today, but if we can find the funding for that, that would be great. The climate action plan projects, I'm all on board with the charging stations. I think that we need to touch base with 3CE because I believe we can get funding from them. I'm not interested in the roundabout. The bike pedestrian safety projects, again, this is where I was talking about of maybe trying to consolidate the Safe Streets program that the county does. And then of course the Perry Bridge maintenance program, I'm on board with that, as well as the tot lot. So that's my general feelings about all those. It'd be great to see you come back with how much we can get if we were to ask for all that. I do have some additional asks to see where we can find some funding for some additional items. Mayor Story, I don't know if you'd like me to bring those up now or wait till you get everyone's feedback on the what's on the screen.
I think that it would be good for us to hear it now so that everyone can maybe be thinking of them in context. So
Okay. I don't know what was on the other screen. Did we approve the PERS funding? That's what we just approved, right? Or what is this one?
That's on this list.
It is on this list.
You went down to the Peary Park. The last three were on the next slide.
Oh, page 11, pardon me. Let me turn the page. Okay, so bike park renovation, if it's grant funded, that's amazing. The Calpers, the 1 million to reach funding target. So if we only have 4.3 million, I've already spent 2.3 on the Warf and another million on the Calpers Trust. I don't know how likely it is for us to get all of that, Jamie. It'd be nice to see some other options and really what the plan would look like in the 5 years. Especially after we get a report out with Merlone Geyer and how fast we need to move on that for planning. And I can't respond to pavement management because there is no number with that. I think we've allocated slurry seals in the past and things of that nature. And we have that wonderful spreadsheet that Steve created on what's the worst street and the best streets and all of that. It'd be nice to see that come back to us with the number on how much that would cost us to address those next slurry seal projects. Steve, I hope I'm saying that correctly. Okay, so I'd also like to see us for staff to come back with a cost in relation to continuing implicit bias training. I think council will have to decide on how often we want to do that, but I like to see that as an ongoing thing, every X amount of years. For the CIP projects, I'd like to add Ballard's onto Monterey Avenue as a potential project. It's really dark out there, and I've gotten some feedback from constituents. So if you're walking up where the park is, Noble Gulch, is that the right name? That's just really dark up there, and Ballard seems to be the best fit instead of putting big giant lights because it shines in people's houses. So those low lights would be really nice. I mentioned the Safe Street programs. Staff brought up the $600,000 that still remains in the general fund that we set aside for COVID. I'd like for staff to explore that $385,000 as reoccurring fund into something more of like a resiliency fund for the next projected years out. You didn't mention what ongoing meant for that 385,000. So I'd be interested in looking at that as a possibility and changing the language, right? So from COVID to resiliency. And I believe, let me just check my notes. That is what I have for additional items to be added for this evening.
For clarification, Councilmember Brooks, the resiliency fund,
Yeah.
that would be at 385,000. Is that correct? Not the full 600,000?
Right. I know when I sat on finance, the fact we've talked about it a little bit of continuing that, but we're doing a little bit better, but we're still experiencing the effects of COVID and employment issues and all of these things that we still have unfilled positions. And there's just a lot still going on with our community that it'd be nice to have a little reserve, but I don't know what ongoing meant in the presentation. So I'd like to see what that means at our budget hearing.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I'll call on Vice Mayor Kaiser.
Thanks, Mayor. I resonate with pretty much all the things that are already on the list that Councilwoman Brooks spoke about in regards to their importance. I did have a question, and I'm not sure who can answer it, but can somebody remind me what the issues with the tot lot was? Like, I know the library got their situation, but what happened with the tot lot?
Jamie, do you want me to answer that since I brought it up so the tot lot at the library is original. So the library was rebuilt, but the tot lot wasn't updated. And at this time, we're seeing a lot of park structures be built that are created with the universal design, meaning all inclusive for all people of all abilities. And this particular tot lot doesn't really fall into that category. So
Yeah.
I ideally would like to see it be a more inclusive space for people of all and kids of all abilities.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. Then I am definitely on board with that. I also wanted to maybe touch on a couple of other things that are not listed in line with the, I guess this would maybe fall under the climate action plan projects. I sit on the Commission for the Environment, and we're working on a program to outreach to local restaurants and make sure that they're using compostable straws, to-go containers, bags, things like that, which obviously was a huge thing during to-go only times and the pandemic. So we want to make sure that all the businesses are on the same page and that they're informed. And then we want to hopefully budget for some type of enforcement to make sure that the guidelines are being followed. So that is something that I wanted to put out there. And then sort of echoing on the, let's see, sorry. I guess just the street, oh, that's under the same thing, but the bike and pedestrian safety. I think I like the idea on the corner of Monterey. I also wouldn't mind looking into a better sort of maybe a signal at the crosswalk across Stockton Ave into Esplanade. It does get a little hairy with pedestrians and tourists and people not paying attention and not knowing what's going on. It can be a little cumbersome crossing there. So also, I think maybe there's been some issues with the light up crosswalk crossing Cliff as well. So I'm not sure if that has been addressed or looked at. But things like that, I think could be an ongoing thing, but I'd like to add that if we can. Thank you so much.
Councilmember Bertrand.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Okay, just want to make sure I'm not on mute again. Yeah, I appreciate the discussion that we've had so far. And my question is about the Warf Rehabilitation Project. My concern obviously is, as we all share, how much we need to do to ensure the safety of this. So, and long-term viability due to waves, actions, and such like this. So is this 2.3, I don't think, because I asked a question about this last time, this is not meant to do the raising of the wharf. This is just to complete the width and maybe the wharf, the floating dock and stuff like that. I just want to get a sense of what this means.
That's correct. This is the project that we went over last meeting. It doesn't include raising the wharf, but it does include all the resiliency improvements, and those improvements can be modified in the future to raise up the level of the wharf with the fiberglass pilings can be added to raise the wharf down the road.
Okay, so we don't have the money to do that, basically. So I'm really into the idea of the charging stations. As many of you know, we've received some emails about availability of charging stations, and this is the future. And we do have a climate action requirement from the state, so this will help us meet that. Now, Jamie, I need your help on this, or maybe Katie, if she's on, could help me on this. So in terms of climate action plan projects, we've done, I think, 2 studies so far dealing with the hazards of climate action mitigation issues that we might possibly need to take care of. But one thing that concerns me is I don't think we've passed this information on to the general public. I may be wrong. We might have mentioned in our newsletters that we've done this, but so what I'd like to add, and maybe come back to us on how this would work, is some way to do public education on what we already know because of the projects that we paid for and funded, rather, to give us reports. I am concerned that people may not be thinking adequately of the issues in this town. We're basically at sea level, and I think they should know of these issues going forward. So I look for some guidance on that, Jamie. If we could add that to this, that would be great.
So just as a point of clarification, you mentioned the climate action plan. It sounds like you might be talking about the LHMP, the hazard mitigation plan that talks about sea level rise and the threats from.
Right. No, I mentioned we have items under climate action plan projects, and you're right. We have the studies. I think we've done 2, and we've identified, zones that are going to be flooded, and we've put timelines on that and such like that. So my concern is that, does the public really know about these things? And, they're planning maybe things for their homes, or they want to know, how this might affect them moving forward. So I think the public should know. That's my issue here. And I think that having some way to get this information out, which we've already detailed through our studies, is important. So I just need some guidance there.
I can comment on that briefly. So AMBAG is prepared to give an update on the climate action plan, but they asked, they recently did an inventory and we got the analysis. But however, the way in which the accounting is done for greenhouse gas emissions and climate to gauge where we are in our goal setting, it's being changing the actual formulas and how it's calculated to be more true to match consumption. So they had asked, I think I got the report back in December. However, they're updating numbers and we're hoping to bring that to you this summer.
Okay, so that's greenhouse gas reduction, but I'm also thinking about, if the sea level is going to rise over a certain rate over the next couple of years, what that means to the Esplanade area and the buildings and such that live there. All those along Riverview are going to be affected. Maybe their docks are going to, maybe you'll have to do some armoring or redoing the dock areas so that they don't get completely lost. That's sort of what I'm talking about, Kitty.
Okay, and I think that would also be built into that Bluff and Cliff Drive study that's proposed under these projects for local hazard mitigation.
Okay, so Katie, I'll take it from you. I'll take your word that that could be a way for us to get the information out to our city residents. Would you agree with that?
Yes, it would definitely be combined in that effort.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, because I want the residents to know about these things, if they have plans for their homes, I think it's important for them to have information to make up their minds on various things they may want to do in the future. Thank you.
I'll also note that the work plan that the council has just sort of approved for next year does include enhanced community outreach. And there's a number of efforts like this that will fall under that overall rubric.
Yeah, I was going to wait until you brought that forward before I ask questions, but if that's being included, I highly commend that on your part.
Councilmember Peterson.
All right, thank you. All right, I have a couple thoughts on what's been presented to us and also ways that I think we might be able to consolidate some of the recommendations that other council members have already brought forward. My priorities in looking what we have in front of us would be to set aside $400,000 for the community center, not knowing what the complete, given the significant facility needs, I think a good start would be the $400,000 to at least do some work on it. I'd also like to see allocation for the $50,000 for studying city hall options. Staff can do an RFP with some consultants. If it looks like $50,000 isn't going to be an option for some consultants to talk to us about our options, then maybe council can reconsider. I'd like to see the $50,000 go towards the Bluff and Cliff Drive study. I think that's really important. It's been eroding for a long time and it's getting worse and worse and worse now. And so I think that's an important thing for us to consider both from an environmental and a safety standpoint. Vice Mayor Kaiser mentioned some crosswalk safety issues, and Councilmember Brooks had mentioned some ballards, and I think both of those could potentially get some funding from the $50,000 recommendation for, excuse me, bike and pedestrian safety, which I think might have been on the next slide. Or at least it was in the packet. Yeah, there we go. Bike and pedestrian safety projects. So those are the kind of smaller allocations, but now I'm considering that it might be important for us to throw some larger chunks of money towards projects, even if we can't fully fund them. And so one of them would be $500,000 to go towards the Warf. The roundabout on Bay Avenue, it says it's a $1.5 million project, but it's already on the RTC's, oh God, what's it called? We're voting on it in like 2 days. Transportation plan.
STIP.
What's that?
I was just thinking of one of the funding sources, sorry.
Yeah, no, not the funding source. It's just, it's on the plan for our county's transportation projects. And if I remember correctly, 500,000 of that's already constrained funding. And so there's only $1 million in funding that's unconstrained. So if we could put another $500,000 towards it, then we're only missing another $500,000 to get it done. And that's a project that we've been talking about for a really long time. That intersection's a nightmare. So I think it'd be worth putting towards that. And then 500,000 towards our Calpers trust. So even if we can't reach the full funding target, putting some money towards it would be great. If I did my math correctly, that brings us to 2.17 million of the, what was it? 2.7 fund balance, something along those lines. And then Councilmember Brooks had mentioned moving 385,000 from the COVID to a resiliency fund. And my recommendation of that would be to move it into our emergency reserves. We already have 10% of our general fund in emergency reserves. And I don't think that we necessarily, and correct me if I'm wrong, staff, I don't think we have to change the percentage that we want to keep in there in order for us to just move money in there. So if that's the case, then I think it would be wise of us to Councilwoman Brooks' suggestion to move $385,000 into that emergency reserve, knowing that then we can use it however we need for resiliency or what have you, without drawing below that 10% of reserve that we have as a mandate for keeping money in there. So that was a lot. Just did all that math real fast. I'm hoping, yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that.
Just for clarification, Councilmember Peterson, so you were recommending allocating 500,000 to the roundabout, the Bay Avenue roundabout in the next fiscal year. Did I hear that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Just
sorry, forgive me. When I was doing my math, I couldn't remember where I had thrown in another 20,000, and it was the charging stations for 2 new charging stations.
Okay.
I'll go for the charging stations. Thank you.
Yeah, and also to clarify, the RTC is contributing 500,000 to the roundabout?
No, they're not contributing to it. I don't remember what the funding source is, but it's on our project list for, what is this thing called? I can't believe I'm not remembering what this is called right now, because we're voting on it in like 2 days, or we're working on it in like 2 days. So it's driving me crazy. Regional Transportation Plan.
The transportation plan.
Yeah, the 2045 Regional Transportation Plan project list, that roundabout is already on there. $500,000 of it is constrained. $1 million of it is unconstrained.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, can I clarify something at this point? So Councilmember Peterson, the $500,000 that's constrained, that is not funding that has been allocated or identified as that. When we put those projects together, we try to identify how much money we think we can come up with, and so if you're put $500,000 toward it today, that would be the $500,000 that is constrained.
Oh,
So it's not available yet, but we think we can come up with that, and the part that we can't come up with is the remainder. So that's what that means in that project. It's not already identified. Thank you.
That's really interesting. Well, in that case, I stand by it because then at least we can say that that 500,000 that's constrained is also identified. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that.
Let's see. Councilmember Bertrand, did you want to go through your list?
Basically, you know, I just talked about things that I felt were pretty important, but Councilwoman Brooks brought up ballots on Monterey, and I just want to, you know, I sort of think I know what she means because I've had the same issue and complaints from other people, but I just want to get an idea of what she meant. Peterson brought it up too. I walk down Monterey Street a lot at night, so I just want to make sure I understand what she meant.
I'm sorry, my computer went out. To ask that question again, Councilmember Bertrand?
No problem. So I just want to understand what you meant about Monterey ballards. And I think I know what you mean because I walk that street a lot at night, coming home from the gym and such. So I just want the council to be clear about what you mean.
Sure. So this actually was an issue that was brought to me in 2018. So when I first came onto council, from several constituents who had brought up the issue of their concern of safety as they were walking with their families at night or walking their dogs up Monterey Avenue. So from Noble Gulch Park up the street towards New Brighton. On the left-hand side, it was really dark on that sidewalk. And what actually came about was that we could possibly partner with PG&E because that was their area and that they could provide lighting. Well, going back and forth a year and a half into it, PG&E then said, actually, that's not ours, that's the city's. And so I've had communication with the constituents then to say, okay, well, you know, we can't really build up because the lights would go into people's houses. You know, we're exploring some ideas, and I talked to staff about what some ideas would be and what the general cost would be. And what we found out was ballards, those low little lights, could be installed right where that sidewalk pathway by the park is right now, for not much. I think it was, gosh, Steve, if you're, I can't see where you are, but if you had that general, do you remember?
It's in the maximum $10,000 range.
Yeah, $10,000. So, but staff suggested that I bring this back to all of you 3 years later for approval. So here I am asking for $10,000 to light up the street for safety measures. So that's what I'm asking this evening. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because it is a safety measure. What happens is when the cars are coming down Monterey after they cross at the top of the hill, you basically have headlights glaring at you, so you can't see anything. That's one of them. And that is a rather dark walkway that I think a lot of people feel somewhat not safe walking up. So I'm glad you brought that up. I know people who've actually fallen off because they couldn't see where they were going.
Okay. Yeah, Councilmember Bertrand, did you have comments on any of the other public improvement goals?
Generally, I agree with everyone. I think it was a pretty good list that staff put together. I just wanted to see some attention given to communicating to the public about the issues that are going to be before them with climate rise. And so that's going to be dealt with, as Katie mentioned, in one of the studies. So that was one of them. And we are going to have more money for the electric charging stations, which I think is going to make a lot of people happy. You've all gotten emails about people who find it's hard to get some of these stations. And the thing that Councilwoman Brooks brought up, I think we got an email from a vendor about I don't know how to put it, but facilities and parks that are more accessible to all sorts of different people, no matter what their circumstances. So, that that's a good thing. Totally, I read that thing. I thought it was a good thing. So, that was an addition. So all in all, I have no problems with things.
Okay. Councilmember Peterson, did you have your hand up again?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, because I had mentioned the Vice Mayor Kaiser's crosswalk and Councilmember Brooks Ballard's going under the kind of bucket of these bike and pedestrian safety projects. And based on the funding that Steve just suggested it might cost, it sounds like those two might still fit in there. So I'm just wondering if Vice Mayor Kaiser and Councilwoman Brooks, for the sake of kind of keeping our key projects within, as much as possible, within what's already here on the screen, for the sake of just keeping it easy for everyone, would be willing to consider their projects as part of these bike and pedestrian safety projects.
Yeah, totally.
I would note that you'll note that item just says 50,000 plus. So
Right.
if there's some specific things, you may want to put more than 50K into it. Considering the bollard lighting, Councilmember Brooks is talking about, I think it was, a little bit under 10. The lit crosswalks, depending on the option, they can run a bit of money. And then there's some other ideas on Park Avenue that have come up this evening. So you may want to bump that item a little bit.
Okay, yeah, I'm happy to bump that up to, 100,000 if that's more appropriate for staff to be able to play with the numbers and bring it back to us, as long as Councilwoman Brooks and Vice Mayor Kaiser are okay with, I'm just trying to keep things within the buckets that we already are looking at when possible, in order for the sake of ease of determining what we're actually spending money on and where.
Yeah, I'll answer your question, Councilmember Peterson. What I'm imagining is staff is going to bring back all of these things in each general principle and have a list for us. And then there's going to be X amount of money. So however they need to play it out, I'm fine with that. As long as that the projects that I identified are included with X amount next to them. And then we can decide from there what needs to stay and what needs to go. Is that how you envisioned it, Jamie?
It is, but you and Councilmember Peterson have not identified the same list. So, we do need to circle that square.
For right now, we're just referring to the bike and pedestrian safety projects. And I think if I'm understanding correctly, what I'm saying is, let's use that as the priority that we will vote on tonight as giving key funding to, as a project for key funding. And then when staff comes back, Councilwoman Brooks will expect to see the money for her ballards under bike and pedestrian safety projects, and Vice Mayor Kaiser would expect to see what kind of funding is available for her crosswalk and et cetera, et cetera. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does. I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
If I understand, I could be misunderstanding as well, but that was my thought.
Yeah, my only thing would be, I just don't want our points to get lost if they're not being included separately or something. That would be my only take on it.
Jimmy, were you still looking for a prioritized list at this stage?
Well, I think that the funding allocation determines the priority. So if a project doesn't get funded, it's not going to be a priority for us to begin working on at this stage. So if council is going to allocate around 3 million, 3.4 million, it should go to the projects that are the highest priority.
So yes, so you do need us to identify priorities, because I have, I don't know that I've necessarily heard these listed in order of priority, but maybe they have been. So is that the way council members presented them, in order of priority, so that Jamie can note them that way? Councilmember Brooks.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Story. So Jamie, we're just doing this a little bit differently this time around. So I think the way I answered the question first was going down the list, was the direction that was given to us, was to go down the list first. and say, you know, these are the things we want to include to have that discussion the next time. And I heard Councilmember Peterson several times be really clear with what we were expecting. So I think what I'll say it this way is that everything you've suggested here, we need to see it on paper with the numbers next to them at the next meeting, at the budget hearing, with these additional items that Councilmember Kaiser, Peterson, myself, anyone else has brought up. And then we could decide then how we're going to stay within that 4.3 million with the projects. I mean, I think that's what I've heard several times, but now you're asking us to prioritize, and I thought we're going to wait for that at the next budget meeting to prioritize.
So, you know, this is your meeting, but my recommendation is to identify the projects that you want to see funded in the budget. And it's fine to make them a little bit more broad and say it's 100,000 for bike ped safety, and let's include a number, you know, staff flesh out the ideas that you've heard discussed here. But there's not enough funding to do everything on the list. So whether it's a question of identifying, you know, the projects that you don't want to move forward with at this time, or as Councilmember Peterson said, I'd like to put 400K into the community center, 50K into the city hall study, all the way through that list. Either way,
Okay.
that's
Yeah. I apologize. I was not ready to put numbers next to projects. I thought we were just creating high level goals tonight. So I appreciate Councilmember Peterson bringing up numbers, but I didn't write them down. So Councilmember Peter, I feel like I have to start all over, to be completely honest, though. I'm sorry, council members. But if Councilmember Peterson is so inclined to say those numbers again, and if staff can leave those projects, I'll pull up the paper and we'll start writing stuff down, or because I think that's what you're asking us now.
That would be helpful, because then we have the feedback on what are the projects that we're going to be putting into the budget, or fleshing out more details for the next stage.
So,
Mayor Story,
Yeah, Councilmember Brooks, why don't you go back and see if you could, you know, put some numbers to your particular projects and.
oh boy.
can Councilmember Peterson repeat her items, and maybe staff? I mean, I think we're being asked something differently now. So
Mayor-
excuse me for not being prepared.
Mayor, could I jump in?
Yeah, hold on just a minute, Councilmember Bertrand. Let's, Councilmember Peterson, why don't you go ahead and go through your list again for the benefit of Councilmember Brooks and.
Yeah, okay. If we could, for the sake of everyone seeing what I'm talking about, I believe we need to go back one slide to the beginning of the. Yes, thank you. So I was recommending 500,000 to go towards the Warf project. It won't be fully funded, but as mentioned, project can be scaled to match budget allocation. And I think if we can continue to put money towards it, that's good. The community center was 400,000. It said addressing near-term needs was 150 to 400. I think it's good to start on the higher end of our lower estimates, so to speak. I'm fine with the tot lot. I didn't include that last time, but I'm fine with the tot lot. That's 150. And then 50,000 for studying the city hall options. 50,000 for the Bluff and Cliff Drive study. If we could go to the next slide. 100,000 for the minimal city hall maintenance in the meantime, while we're determining what's going to happen with city hall 5-10 years from now, however long. 20,000 for 2 charging stations. 500,000 towards the roundabout project on Bay and Cap Avenue. We're now up to 100,000 for the bike and pedestrian safety projects. And 500,000 towards our Calpers trust. So I think that brought me up to what, 2.5? We added some, so 2.6, 2.5.
I had that, I think, at 2.7, but don't quote me on
Okay.
that one.
Yeah.
And our
Oh,
budget
plus-
was
plus
4
the-
point, yeah.
Sorry, plus the 385 that Councilwoman Brooks had asked to be set aside for a resiliency fund of some sort. I had suggested the emergency reserve, but I'm happy to put it, wherever council deems it necessary. So those are my priorities for getting things done. So anything I didn't list, I wouldn't consider my personal budget priorities. And if it turns out that we have additional funding, because I only suggested 2.7 million. And I know that there's more than that to be spent, but those are my priorities that I would like to see council return, or I'm sorry, staff return to council in the budget.
Okay. Councilmember Brooks, are you prepared to go through your list with numbers now, or you want me to come back to it?
Sure, I'll just, if I could just ask Councilmember Peterson, just a high level question. Knowing that there was some just extra funding available, was there any reasons that you didn't do like Perry Park or Peary Park Bridge or any of those kind of or the Stockton Bridge program? Any?
Because these are just the ones that I'm prioritizing right now. I know other council members are going to have other suggestions for what they want prioritized. And I did hear, I think you and I believe it was Councilmember Bertrand mentioned those. So I imagine they probably will end up in our priority list if we end up with kind of a merging of all of our priorities. But as City Manager Goldstein mentioned, we just don't have the funds for every single project. And so I was choosing the ones that I would prioritize funding for.
Okay, thank you. Mayor, sorry to answer your question. I just need a minute.
Okay. Then I'll turn to Councilmember Bertrand.
Yeah, I like the old way of presenting where there's a spreadsheet and we could actually, see what each one is doing so we get a rough idea. But let's go back to the top. I wasn't prepared for this in this sense also. Is this the top one? The top one had the Warf on it, I think. Top page? Yeah.
It's 10.
So I want to fully fund that. I think that the Warf is a major thing in Capitola. It's critical in many different ways. And once we get that Warf done, it's going to be sort of like getting our library done. Community center, I think, is definitely a need. That's another center part of our community for lots of things that mean tons of things to the public. So 400,000 for that. Local mitigation, I'm actually for all of these things because they are issues that potentially could bite us. And if we don't deal with them now. So in terms of funding, I'll go 50,000 for City Hall. Stockton Bridge reinforcement. I think at this point we could go for the low end. So let's say 400,000. Love Drive study. I have no clue how much money we need to do a study. And I do think we need to get out to the public, but we've already done in the past. So I'll stick with staff recommendations of 50. Hopefully that does it. Noble Gulch Engineering, I'll stick with 50. That actually is a major thing. It flooded the mobile home park. Noble Gulch, so that's something we need to do. Let's get to the next page, please. Maintenance, City Hall maintenance. I hope we could do it for 50,000. I'll go for that. McGregor, I'll pass on that. Climate action charging stations, I've heard 20, I'll go for 20, roundabout. Where are we at on that? What did Peterson say on that?
500,000.
Okay, I'll say 500,000 bike safety projects. Brooks put in for that. I'll probably parrot hers. I'll stick with 50 unless that goes up. Perry Park Bridge maintenance. I'm not sure what we need to do there except to replace a lot of the boarding. Can we stop here for a minute? Steve, would you tell us what the Perry Park Bridge maintenance is? I know a lot of wood needs to be replaced. That's about it. Maybe some painting.
So as you know, we did some structural repairs of the wharf of the bridge, I'm sorry.
That was a
in an
foundational
emergency
issue.
basis. I think there's some continued structural repairs that aren't critical right now, but we need to get ahead of rather than doing them on an emergency basis.
I think we have to put a
And, that's
spreadsheet
what
on.
we'd like to take.
Okay, well,
Jamie, you're not muted.
what? Okay, yeah, I'll take Steve's word. If it's something that's structural that might bite us in the future, I'll go with this estimate of 100,000. And you know, we already granted allocation for PERS fund. I'll go for the $1 million. I think it's very critical that we provide for the funding of PERS, you know, our employees' retirement, et cetera. And often, if we can't pay for it, then we have to take a bond and actually pay more for it to retire the bond. So those are the ones I feel are high priority. Jamie, what did that get us to on that?
So I just called Jim and he's putting up a spreadsheet showing everyone total.
Thank you very much. This is extremely helpful.
Yeah, because I think we're going to need to. Kristen's total, I think, came out to about 2.75. I'm afraid you went over though, but I'll have to see it. Jim's putting it in right now. Okay. Did you get the last item, Jim, when I called and bothered you? I think Jacques suggested $1 million for the PERS Trust.
Yep. That's correct.
I will get that right now. I think I
what?
$1 million for the PERS Trust.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I'm trying to support the big ticket items that the city has responsibilities for the public and also for our employees.
I cannot get rid of this PowerPoint now. Makes no sense.
Whoever dog that is reminds me my Reggie is no longer here.
It's my dog.
It's your dog. Oh, she wants to walk already.
This is not working today.
Well, Jim, why don't you continue to work on that, and I'll see if Councilmember Brooks is.
I'm like calculating everything as we.
I know you. I see that with your calculator. You just throw them out, and you know Jim will put them up there, and we'll calculate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think.
Thanks, Jim.
If anything, I agree with Councilmember Peterson and what Councilmember Bertrand is presenting. It's pretty much like we're going the low end of all of the recommendations. I guess what I would just add is that whatever's left over, so whatever X is at the end.
I saw it.
Jim, we could hear you. Jim, thanks. I would like to see it go towards the Warf project. So in a perfect world, if there's anything left, which there probably won't be, I'd love to see an increase the Warf Rehabilitation project. So as Jim, yeah, community center, 400, beautiful. City Hall, 500, great. Stockton Bridge, I think we need to bring that back to 350, not 400. That was the low end of that. Bluff Cliff Drive, 50 for Noble Gulch, 100 for the City Hall, Noah McGregor. Charging stations, 20. Bike pedestrian safety projects, 100. Tot lot, 150. Calpers, 500K. the resilience fund, that using that 385 on that. The one thing that I didn't see here, and this might not be much, and we could bring it next to the budget hearing, is the implicit bias training. I think we have a pot of money called something for trainings. So we might not even need to go there tonight, because that's such a small amount. So that should leave us about $50 million more to spend, right, folks? 50 million more? No? Okay.
So
Not quite.
I think you outpaced Jim's data
Okay,
entry
Jim, you want me to
capacity.
go again?
Well,
Jim, I'll go up.
I think that you were trying to fully fund the Warf. Is that correct?
Well, no, I'll stick with the 500 just for continuity across the board. Okay. Oh, I see what Jim's doing. I was reading. Okay. Tot lot, great. Community center 400. City hall options 50. Stockton Bridge 350. Bluff 50. Noble Gulch 50. City Hall 100. Charging stations 20. Bike pedestrian safety projects 100. Tot lot 150. Calpers 500. Resilience Fund 385. And that's ongoing, right? Did I miss anything?
So it looks like your total is about 2.6.
Those are some amazing formulas you got going on, Jim.
Hey, Jim, do you think you could bump the font, the Zoom lower right corner, just hit that plus button a couple times? Does that help, folks?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Did you finish your list, Councilmember?
Yeah, and I think that's, and so if we're still kind of staying with the same premise, help me, Mayor Story, that then at our next meeting, whatever's left over, we could talk about these kind of other projects that we didn't fund. Right. And so maybe upping the Warf at a later time. We just don't know what the exact numbers would be. Is that will happen at our budget hearings? This is just giving staff something to work with.
Right. Jamie, I think that this would be a good starting point and we could come back. And, you know, if we need to whittle some more or add more, as the situation may be, we still need to get to a majority approval, though, on some of these items. So.
Yeah, a couple things. Absolutely, we can follow the process that you just outlined. If this is where we want to allocate it right now, we do have a little bit of a deadline coming up on the Warf. And Steve, you can remind us. You're hoping to be able to bid a project, which you need to know what project you're bidding by when.
Sorry, you caught me stretching my legs. You know, our goal is to try and start construction probably in October, which means we need to probably be going to bid potentially before the budget is set. At this point, we probably want to go to bid in May at the latest and award a contract in July before our recess so that we could begin in October. It's going to take a long time for the contractor to gear up with that.
And how long do you need to prepare the bid documents?
About 6 weeks, I'd estimate at this time.
Okay, so your goal would be to know what project we're bidding coming up in April.
That would be good.
So that is one. While we could put more money into the Warf project, and we don't have to bid on the schedule, if we know what we're bidding, that certainly is going to help.
Okay, I want to now bring this back to Vice Mayor Kaiser and see if she wants to put in her numbers into the spreadsheet.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I am personally leaning towards more of the full funding of the Warf. So if that's the 2.3, then that's fine. The community center, I'd be interested actually in just sort of seeing what the lower end of that would get us. I don't know the specific needs of the community center at this time. So getting a little bit more information on that. I am for the tot lot. And then City Hall, yes, the 50. Stockton Bridge, I would stick with the lower end. So the 350, the Bluff 50, Noble Gulch 50. I'm trying to like scroll like it's my screen. Then, sorry, Jim, thanks. Where did we go? Oh, didn't we already do a City Hall?
So it was a City Hall study trying to figure out what the long-term plan is for City Hall. And then there's kind of the Band-Aid, the lipstick on the pig.
Okay, let's do that Band-Aid for the 100,000. And then, yeah, the McGregor will have to pass for me. Charging stations, the 20,000 for both. I'll skip on the roundabout. Bike and pedestrian safety, I'd like 100,000. Peary Bridge, it's not super up there for me, but if we need to allocate, I can do that, I guess, because I skipped some of the other ones. Bike park renovation, no. Calpers, I would go with the 500 personally. Park Ave. Oh, and then yeah, I would like to. Was that 100,000 just added in after tonight's comment? Is that what that was for? On the Park Ave traffic calming?
I'm not sure.
You're talking about the bike and pedestrian safety projects?
This last line under pavement management, it says Park Ave traffic calming bike lane for 100,000, but nobody's.
Sorry, that was my notes earlier before I put this on the screen. I'll get rid of that because we've combined them now with bike and pedestrians.
Oh, okay. Great. And then yeah, the 385 resilience reserve, or however we want to coin that.
So it's just a little bit of a reminder. Our minimum available funding at this point, we think, is 4.13. I suspect that there will be more. If we were to aim for a $750,000 fund balance, that would be 3.4 million in total. I think we could, if we're going to be setting the 385 aside as a resiliency fund, I think we could go back to a $500,000 fund balance. Would take us to about 3.65 available to allocate. Help me out, Jim. I'm double counting this resiliency.
3.6. You were close. 3.64 basically. I have it on the screen.
Okay, so we could go to 3.6 in spending if we take the 385, put it in reserves, and then go for a 500K fund balance.
Yes.
Okay. So I think Councilmember Kaiser, I think you're a little over.
Yeah. Yes. For sure.
But Councilmember Bertrand is winning the day.
I wasn't like going for exact. I was kind of prioritizing based on my ideals. I do want to put it out there that to me the Warf, only because of the budgeting and the permitting and all of that stuff, that weighs heavy for me. So I would kind of want to put more of my money towards there, and I'm willing to like trim elsewhere if that can take priority personally.
Okay. So looks like the council members have concluded their numbers. I guess I'll go through and add mine at this
Kite
time.
trim later.
What's that, Councilmember Bertrand?
Well, I was wondering, I was thinking about trimming, so I don't know if it's a good time to do that now, or because you do have to do yours.
Yeah, I have some
Yeah.
edits that I think can bring us all on the same page, but I think I'd like to see Mayor Story's comments first.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, let me throw mine up there, then we can see where we need to trim. So my thoughts about the Warf. I think that we need to complete that full project and proceed with it. Because it was based upon a promise through this Measure F, and I think that we should follow through and complete it as expeditiously as possible. Now, with that said, recognizing if there's availability of borrowing some of the money up front and using future Measure F sales tax to pay for it, could certainly be a feasible approach. So hold on, let me, the community center, at this point, I think I would like to see the list of the work that needs to be done. And also I'd like to see where the school district is with the long-term lease. And so until that point, I think I would like to keep that at 150 for now. The tot lot, since we have some library surplus that could maybe allocated to that and potentially, and I think that's a good point that Councilmember Brooks has made about it. I'm willing to commit 150 for that. On the local hazard mitigation projects, I'm in agreement with the list there, except for, again, the Stockton Bridge reinforcement project. Again, I'm, I guess, unclear of the engineering and design work that supports what that project is and how much it may cost. And so I would like to maybe just see, maybe 50,000 for that, design engineering work. Because that hasn't happened yet, has it, Jamie?
I'll speak in here. We did the feasibility study that identified options for doing it to Stockton Avenue Bridge. We have not done any engineering. And as you can imagine, there's going to be quite a bit of permitting required to do anything on the bridge too. So.
Right. Okay. Well, I just think that, maybe we should focus on more focused attention on narrowing in on what project we want it to be. And so, and that's why I hate constraining that much money when we're so far out on a project, when we have more immediate need. But with that said, the City Hall maintenance, 100,000 on that. The McGregor sidewalk, I'm in agreement. I think that's too big of a cost and not as urgent at this time. So I think we can skip that. We seem to be in unanimous agreement on that. The charging stations, that's not very much money, but it seems to me that should be funded through either grants or we should be encouraging private businesses to set up charging stations in their lot. I don't know, at Scotts Valley, they just put in a number of the Tesla high charge stations in the Kings Plaza shopping center. To me, that may be more appropriate way to go. But if we could get grant money to fund our expense, that could maybe work. So now on the roundabout, I don't think we should constrain money on that project this year. And it's not because I don't support it. I support the roundabout, but I just don't see it coming to fruition for multiple years because it still needs PG&E to do the undergrounding of the utilities. And until that happens, you know, I don't see us really moving forward with that, and therefore kind of tying up money for long periods of time when we have other needs. Just my thoughts. The bike pedestrian safety, 100,000 for that. I'm all in on that. Let's see, to PERS, 500,000. I think that, and the resiliency fund for 385, I think I support that. I know that's going to take me over, but we can, but one thought about that is I wouldn't recommend putting that into the emergency reserve because I'm not sure that that's the kind of resiliency that we want to try to address. I just think it would be hard to pull it out of an emergency reserve. And I'm not sure if that was, you know, the intention of this type of fund, but so those are my thoughts on the list. So did I miss anything, Jamie?
I just did notice a little typo, and it wasn't on your side, Jim. I think that you forgot a 0 on the tot lot item on Councilmember Stories.
Oh,
Yeah, and I should
That's bad news.
the Peary Park Bridge. I do. Is that there's no numbers put in there?
I don't think we've heard anybody put that in as a priority at this stage.
Okay, well, I would like to maybe footnote that particular project and come back to it if we should, you know, have additional funding, but nothing at this point since I'm already over.
one thing I was going to say on the Mayor Story on the resiliency fund is if it might make more sense to use the contingency reserve. I think we have a little more flexibility with the contingency reserve. Emergencies, in my mind, I'd have to go back and read it, but an emergency in my mind is, you know, a tsunami, an earthquake, a fire, something along those, where contingency is more flexible, kind of evening out the ebbs and flows of revenues and expenditures.
Yeah. I would still feel more comfortable just leaving it as a kind of, you know, constrained fund balance. I think it would certainly be easier for the council members to access than being put into either one of our reserves, which are more ordinance driven or principle driven. So, so those are my thoughts at this point, and numbers. Now, Jimmy, are you wanting us to go through and?
It would be helpful to have a unified, you know, a motion to do something that totals up to somewhere in the range of between 3.5 and 3.7, if the council can get there. Otherwise, we can take this and continue the conversation. But I do think the key here, the biggest one, is making a decision on the Warf, because that will start to impact the project timelines if we want to push that out.
Mayor Story, I'm prepared to make a motion.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Councilmember Peterson.
I wanted to trim some of my estimates.
Well, let's hear Councilmember Peterson's motion and
Yeah.
Okay,
If you don't mind, Jacques, just because I'm going to be changing some of my numbers and including some of other people's numbers, and I think hopefully this will bring us to a like a united agreement
Go for it.
here, or
Okay.
closer anyway. So Jim, if you
Well,
wouldn't
Jim,
mind,
yeah.
yeah, Jim, if you wouldn't mind putting this as like a separate, not necessarily changing mine from what I initially suggested, but as its own column. So here's what my motion is to. Oh yeah, no, keep that. No, down with all of these like itemized things we've been doing. Yeah, okay, perfect. Okay, my motion is to put 1.5 million towards the wharf. 150,000 towards the community center. 150,000 for the tot lot. 50,000 for the city hall options. 350 for the Stockton Bridge reinforcement project. 50 for Noble Gulch. Is that what that is? No, I'm sorry. 50 for the Bluff and Cliff Drive study. 50 for Noble Gulch. Where am I? Cliff, Bluff.
minimal city maintenance.
100 for the minimal city hall maintenance. What's the next one? 20 for the charging stations. But if we can get grants for it, great. I'm willing to cut the roundabout. You guys are breaking my heart, but we'll cut the roundabout down to 0. Because that's where I'm getting some of the money for the wharf.
right. And I don't intend to ultimately cut it. No,
I know.
I strongly support it. I really do.
I'm just giving you a hard time for hating all my ideas. No, I'm just kidding. Where am I? So cut the roundabout. 100,000 for the bike and pedestrian safety projects. And 500,000 to the Calpers. And that should bring us at like, oh wait. Yep. And 385 for the resiliency fund. And that should bring us to like 3.45 or something along those lines. Yeah. Boom. Between 3.5 and 3.7, everyone got a little bit. No one got everything. That's my motion.
I
hope
second.
You will
I
accept it.
third it.
Excellent. Well done. Just points of clarification. I didn't. So the fire risk reduction, you
0.
Eliminated. Okay.
No, I don't think anyone put anything towards that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And the Peary Park Bridge, you also eliminated.
Only because no one else put anything towards those either.
Okay.
If we
Actually, I did, but it wasn't captured. So I'm going to put myself in with the Sam. Steve
Okay.
mentioned that we need to do something, so I was going along with this.
All right,
But
well,
it didn't get captured, so that's fine.
put
I think this is
$50,000 to each of those, and then we're at 3.5 something.
I'm sorry. Say that again, Councilmember Peterson.
If we put $50,000 to each of those, which is better than nothing, right? I mean, $50,000 worth of bridge maintenance is better than 100. Is not as good as 100,000, but better than nothing. And then same with the fire resiliency. It said 20 to 100,000, so put 50 there. And we still come out at 3.5.
Does
I
that
accept
mean
the
I-
amendment to your
So that's
motion.
yeah. This
I accept
Councilmember-
the amendment.
All right, great. That's what I wanted to hear. All right.
Thank you, Ms. Brooks.
So Jamie, does the motion give you what you need
It does.
to move us forward? Excellent. That sounds good. And so with that, I'm going to call for, well, hold on.
Just double check.
Yeah, I'm going to go out to the public quickly, just see, make sure no members of the public there's wishes to speak to the motion at this time.
Mayor Story, I do not see anyone with their hands raised at this time or any emails on the item.
Okay. So I'll bring it back and ask for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Bertrand,
I appreciate the compromise. I'll vote for it.
Councilmember Brooks,
Aye.
Councilmember Peterson,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Kaiser,
Aye.
Mayor Story.
Aye.
Thank you.
Good work, everyone, and thank you for your motion, Councilmember Peterson. So with that, it brings us to item number 8, item number 8, which is adjournment, and which at this time I will adjourn us